Interesting article from Patrick Buchanan, written on November 9th before the Paris attack, called Can Europe Survive This Invasion? A modern-day mass migration is taking place that could change the face of Europe's civilization, warned Hungarian President Viktor Orban. If that happens, that is irreversible. There is no way back from a multicultural Europe, said Orban. If we make a mistake now, it will be forever. Orban acted on his beliefs. He erected a 110-mile fence on the Serb border, redirecting hundreds of thousands of migrants away from Hungary to Croatia, thence to Austria and Germany. Sunday, after a third of a million had passed through, Croatia replaced a center-left with a rightist party. A fortnight ago, the right-wing eurosceptic Law and Justice Party won a landslide victory in Poland. Support for Angela Merkel, who has opened Germany to a million migrants, is plummeting. Bavaria's CSU, sister party of Merkel's CDU, is in rebellion. Bavaria has been the main port of entry for the hundreds of thousands of arriving migrants. Europe is undergoing the greatest mass migration since World War II, when 14 million Germans were driven out of Prussia and Eastern Germany and Central and Eastern Europe. That mass migration halted after 2 years, but no end is in sight to the migration from Africa and the Middle East. As long as Europe's border remain open, they will come, and the people who wish to come number not just in the millions, but in the tens and scores of millions, and they know how to get there. The routes through Turkey to the Balkans on land, or across a few miles of the Med to the Greek islands, or from Libya to Lampedusa and Sicily, or into the Spanish enclaves on the Moroccan coast, or out of the Canary Islands, are arduous but not impossible. Why should they not come? Why should Arabs and Africans not flee the tyranny, terror, poverty, and war that are their lot to come to Europe, live the good life, and have life's necessities provided for their families by the munificent welfare state of Northern Europe? And what is to stop them? Jean Raspail in the Camp of Saints is proving more prophetic than Aldous Huxley's Brave New World or Orwell's 1984. Considering the crisis facing Europe, the question is no longer will the EU survive, it is Orban's question, will European civilization survive the century? This year, the EU monetary union, the Eurozone, avoided breaking apart because Athens capitulated and accepted austerity, and the hard-bargaining Germans agreed to a bailout. How long will Greeks and club members of the EU accept austerity? How long will Germans bail out nations whose people like to work fewer hours while enjoying superior social benefits? Under the Schengen Agreement, there are to be barriers to trade and travel, to the movement of goods and people inside the EU. Yet, across Europe, fences are going up, borders are being reestablished, anti-immigrant and anti-EU parties like the National Front of France's Marine Le Pen are gaining converts. If the mass migration are not halted, the rise of nationalist regimes at the expense of Europe's liberals and leftists is inevitable. With birth rates in this smallest and least populated of continents below replacement levels for decades, Europe is aging, shrinking, and dying as it is being invaded and altered forever. Optimists point to how America absorbed the 15 million that arrived in the great wave of immigration from 1890 to 1920. But they ignore the difference. America's immigrants were Europeans from Christian nations coming to a country with a history of assimilation. And the Great Wave stopped in 1924 for 40 years. Unlike America, Europe has never known mass immigration. And those pouring into Europe are Arab, African, and Muslims, not European Christians or Jews. They come from other civilizations and culture, and they are not all assimilating, but rather creating enclaves in Europe that replicate the lands whence they came. Last year, the Swiss voted to cut back on immigration. This year, with the UK Independence Party growing in popularity, Prime Minister David Cameron is demanding reforms in the EU Charter before the British vote on whether to leave the EU altogether. With migrants in the thousands milling around Calais and the entrance to the tunnel to Dover, Brits must be wondering whether it was wise to dig that tunnel beneath the channel to their island home. The threats raised by the mass migration into Europe rise to the level of the existential. Can a civilization survive the replacement of the people who created it by people of other races, religion, and civilizations? Ask the Native Americans. Will Europe remain Europe if she is repopulated by Arabs, Muslims, Asians, and Africans? What will hold Europe together? Free trade? In 1981, when solidarity was crushed by the Warsaw regime on the orders of Moscow, Americans took up the cry, "Let Poland be Poland." One day soon, a voice will arise across the Atlantic calling for an end to this invasion, by force if necessary, and declare, "Let Europe be Europe." This is obviously an excellent column by Pat Buchanan, but again, we must not blame others. It's always natural for a group of people to always blame others. We see this with blacks in this country who blame white people for their troubles, and we see, of course, feminists blame society or males and so on. So there's always this pointing out. But I think we have to take responsibility and blame ourselves. That Europeans have no one to blame but themselves. They're the ones who open and have opened their borders to this migration for whatever reason. Maybe they thought that their numbers were dwindling, they needed cheap labor, which I think is probably the main reason, and maybe a kind of a misdirected understanding of being humane and being a responsible member of the world's community. But the fact is that if this continues, obviously the big countries will become majority, certainly non-Christians and non-white. We already see the small countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, and pretty soon the Scandinavian countries will become minority, non-white. And the crime rate is going through the roof. We see how white women in Sweden, for instance, and Norway are literally hunted down by Africans and Muslims. They call them cheap meat. Sweden is now called the rape capital of Europe. So we see this form of genocide taking place. And again, we have no one to blame but ourselves for this. The Europeans have to, as long as they are the majority, have to make a decision and close the borders and do like Augustus did in the 1st century AD, when he rewarded people to have extra children. And I think this is the problem. It's the replacement rate. White women, unfortunately, are not having children, and there ought to be some form of program that rewards this. Unfortunately, now some countries, they actually do have this program. In France, for instance, where there are many benefits for women who have children. Unfortunately, the ones who are taking advantage of it are the very people that we don't want to procreate and sire children, and we're talking about here Africans and Muslims. So we have it all backward. We are paying taxes in order to pay for children who are not white, to get an education. I mean, we have a situation where white Europeans and even white Americans are paying billions in taxes to basically educate people who are not like them. And so Americans and Europeans have to make a decision here and be realistic and put aside any of the usual kind of liberal ideology and have the same consciousness that you see in other groups. Because we know that Muslims, their allegiance is not to their country, their allegiance is to their religion. We see this in Hispanics in this country, where their real motivation for having more people from Latin America come to the United States is that they believe that this country was stolen from them and that it belongs to them. And that's the reason why they're so committed to the belief that more immigrants from Latin America must invade the United States, because in their mind, this was their land that was taken from them. And they're not afraid anymore to tell the whites in this country to go back to Europe. And they will not be so reluctant to, when they become the majority in America, to perhaps chase white Europeans out of North America at the point of violence. So I think we have groups all over the globe who have a racial consciousness. Unfortunately, white Europeans don't have that, and their worst enemies, by the way, are the liberal and the leftist politicians and intellectuals who actually go along with the multicultural ideology.